Well, hello again there, good people. It's the Big Heavy, and today I want to share with you 3 mistakes that I made during the course of my 20-odd-ish year career. And I'm doing this not in some bizarre form of self-flagellation, but in the hopes that some of the things I did wrong along the way resonate with you and maybe help you take that fork in the road that I missed or that it took me a few extra years to get through my thick skull. And during my time in the workforce, I've worked with all manner of different organizations, everything from huge multinational companies to consulting type of companies to, for a while, having my own small firm, which at its peak had about 3 people on the payroll. And I've made dozens, if not hundreds of mistakes along the way. These are only 3, and hopefully they help you in your career and help you avoid some of the situations that I found myself into that I wish I would have learned a little earlier. And the 3 things I'm going to walk you through today are, first of all, realizing that there's people out there in your company and maybe a little more broadly that are willing, able, and interested in helping you along your way, and generally they don't want something in return. Secondly, thinking through paying your dues. And this section might sound a little bit like the kind of get off my lawn old man stereotype, but
get off my lawn.
It was something that it took me a little while to learn, and much to my detriment, wish I would have realized it a bit earlier. And then finally, thinking about your career in terms of a term I'll borrow, which is the talent stack idea. And we'll get a little more into that, but I think it's a little bit more of an effective way of planning, growing, and thinking about your career than, I need to get to this position in this company or learn this particular skill. As always, if you have found some other things or something in here isn't clear or helpful, drop in the comments, hit all the buttons. It does things for somebody somewhere. And with that out of the way, let's start with realizing that there's people out there that are willing and able to help you. And for me, and this might be just something with kind of how I'm wired, I always thought of myself earlier in my career as kind of this lone wolf. I had this sort of me against the world kind of attitude. And I would go all these oldsters, what was what. I came out of school, the stereotypical young dude, full of piss and vinegar, didn't think he needed any help or any guidance from anyone else. And that was actually fairly detrimental. I think there are some industries and career pathways where maybe people aren't willing to help you. I have some family members in the arts, and it sounds like there's a little bit of a kind of eat the young type of attitude in there where, people at the peak of their profession, whether they're, directors or kind of, world-renowned artists or something, sort of beat up on the low folks in the totem pole. And there's some kind of weird Darwinian attitude in those types of fields. But at least the field I was in, which at the time was management consulting, there was a lot of desire and, frankly, kind of industrial scale encouragement for people that were further along in their career to help the younger people that were coming up. And this was everything from official training programs to informal mentoring to, people that would just kind of find somebody whose career they were interested in for whatever reason, and in the background would help bump them along and, help get them opportunities. And that happened to me, a couple points early on in my career. And I can think of one particular instance. I was an intern at the organization I ultimately ended up working for straight out of college. And one of the guys in that organization kind of kept tabs on me for the first couple or 3 years where I was in that company and lined up opportunities for me, everything from getting on kind of interesting proposals to, helping me get on projects or things like that. And never did this overtly, never CC'd me on an email, never kind of reached out and said, hey, I did this for you for whatever reason, I'd like some kind of thanks or whatnot. And, after those couple or 3 years, I sort of found out through back channels that this person had, for whatever reason, taken an interest in my career and gone out of his way to do some of these things. And I ultimately called him up, he had retired at this point, and said, hey, I didn't really realize at the time, mostly because I was a big dumb animal and to a large extent still am, and just wanted to thank you and really appreciate that you did this. And, he kind of said, didn't expect any thanks, just people looked out for me early on in my career. I felt like paying it forward. And, for whatever reason, you seemed like somebody that could use some bumps along the way. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, I think society is now wired to be a little more cynical. And, this idea that there's just random folks out there that through nothing other than, goodwill and the personal satisfaction they get by helping other younger humans along their journey, that doesn't really exist. And at least I can tell you in the fields I've been in, some of the organizations I've been in, that still does exist. There are people out there that through no other gratification than seeing somebody succeed and kind of helping somebody out because maybe they got a little boost or a little bit of help in their journey, are doing that to younger folks. I try and do that, and again, it's not for ego. I'm not trying to get something out of it. Maybe you could argue it's an ego thing to some extent, but there are those people out there. And I think early in my career, I wish I would have actively looked for those type of people. I wish I would have been, more thankful. I wish I would have found mentors, because I think most of those people are willing to more actively mentor and engage with those young folks, merely for the price of shooting someone an email and saying, hey, will you, kind of help me out in my career progress? And I wish I would have had a little less of that attitude that, I was this hot shot, I didn't need help from anyone, and I was going to show the world what was what without any help. And the kind of concrete piece of advice I'd give you is, if somebody out there says, hey, I'd be happy to offer you some guidance, I'd be happy to help mentor you at an organization you're involved with, generally that's a legitimate and honest and heartfelt offer. I've done that a few times, and I've frankly been surprised how few people have taken me up on that. And when somebody does, it's frankly kind of an exciting and interesting thing for me. I've been there 20 years ago. I was fresh out of school and didn't know anything about anything. So, having somebody that reaches out and says, hey, can you help me along my way is fun for me, quite frankly. And it's not, I'm not trying to get anything out of it. Just that act of helping somebody that's starting their journey, and, in the hopes that they'll pay it forward, and also, me kind of repaying those folks that have helped me along the way, is a reward in and of itself. So look out for those offers, take them seriously. You don't necessarily have to grab onto everyone, but if you see a leader and he or she kind of says, hey, I'm happy to help you out and offer guidance, if it's somebody that you kind of jive with and they seem like somebody that's kind of your type of person, take them up on that offer and see what happens. I think in the worst case, you'll get a little free guidance and advice, and in the best case, you might get somebody that's kind of watching out for you and helping steer you along your career. Second career mistake I made, and it was kind of related to the first one. Again, this may sound a little bit get off my lawn-ish, but I didn't really realize coming out early in my career the necessity of what was called back in the day paying your dues. I don't know what they call it these days, but it's essentially the fact that yes, you've gone through all this schooling. Yes, maybe you've come out of a fantastic institution with ivy on the walls and big endowment and all that stuff, and maybe you even have some sort of advanced degree. But academia and the workforce are kind of two different places. You sort of learn the theory in one, maybe you learn some big thinking techniques, but then practical application and the speed and the culture and kind of the approaches that you encounter in the actual workforce are fairly different from what you maybe encountered in academia. And to some extent, some of the employers and some of the recruiting processes set you up for failure in this area. At least when I went through recruiting, I was talking to most of the consulting companies, and all of them would have these BSE HR type videos where they talk about how they only hired the best and the brightest. The last big company I worked for would constantly run around parroting that they were more selective in their hiring process than Harvard or something like that, based on percentages. And if you delve a little deeper in there, it was kind of a goofy statistic. But all these companies sort of tell you, we're hiring the greatest humans ever created, and they're the smartest, most capable, best looking, blah, 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 et cetera type people. And you get filled with all this BS, and then it's hard to avoid not believing your own hype, and then coming into a entry-level position or starting off at a new firm and being like, all right, I'm the shit, I'm ready to go, I don't need anyone telling me anything. And in my case, when I just started out and came in with that attitude, literally some of my first jobs were proofreading other people's slides. I think one of my favorite jobs in retrospect, which sounds pretty goofy, was me and another gentleman who both came out of high-powered, expensive colleges and had all these credentials and all this other BS, were tasked with buying candy on a weekly basis so we could fill up candy bowls in this room where people were testing a software application. So literally me and another dude in our Dockers and our fancy shirts that we thought were what cool official consultant type people dressed like, would go down to the local store during the workday and buy like $300 worth of candy and then fill up candy bowls. That was what my fancy degrees had qualified me for. And I frankly remember getting kind of pissed off that I was doing these mundane tasks. I was doing a lot of errands and like go free stuff for other people. But part of that was sort of proving to my colleagues that I could actually take a task, figure out how to do it, execute it consistently. And I found that, doing some of these goofy things and kind of being a general helper for this team of 200-ish people that were working on this big software project helped me start to get to know different people, exposed me to a whole bunch of different stuff, even doing like mundane Excel and PowerPoint type of things. I started to learn both some technical knowledge about how the software we were putting in worked, but I think more importantly, started to learn how these large projects worked, how different people interacted, how the sort of flow of a project would go from start to finish, what things looked like when there were challenges, how problems got resolved, and kind of learning all these things that you couldn't really put in a training course or put in a welcome to this field type of training that HR would give you. And by virtue of doing all these goofy tasks successfully over a few months, my assignment after that was a little more complex. I was sort of a full-fledged, albeit entry-level member of a team versus the kind of bottom of the barrel, doer of random tasks. And I kind of, moved up from there. But at each stage, there were elements of learning on the job. There were elements of proving myself to the people around me. And even though at the time, maybe it seemed frustrating or seemed beneath me, now looking back and seeing young people come into some of these fields, a lot of them are, brilliant. They probably know significantly more than I do from a technical aspect, but they don't necessarily understand the human aspect of how work gets done and how all these interpersonal relationships and kind of political factors and all that stuff works. So the advice I give you if you're earlier in your career, don't be afraid of that idea of paying your dues. Don't be afraid of the fact that maybe you get an assignment where it's literally beneath you technically. It uses 10% of this knowledge that you spent so much of your life to this point acquiring. And look at what you can learn. Look at, hey, are there people that I admire that work a certain way? How do people convey information? How do people deal with challenges? What are the interpersonal relationships between teams? How do different people lead teams? How do those leaders collaborate? And the more you can kind of be a student of your environment, I think the more you'll quickly learn. And in general, at least in my experience, you'll move up pretty rapidly from those early dues paying type of roles. The final mistake I made, and hopefully it's something you can avoid, and it's something I wish I had started kind of from the outset of my career, and I sort of backed into it accidentally. And that's thinking of your career and your skills in terms of a talent stack. And I'm stealing that term from, I think it came from Scott Adams, who's the guy that created those Dilbert cartoons that you find, plastered all over every corporate IT department in the world. And I may be butchering the concept, but the way I've interpreted it and the way I've used it is think in terms of how do I acquire different talents that fit together and combine so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, versus thinking in terms of, oh, I need to learn this programming language, or, oh, I need to learn this software package, or I need to go to this training class, or, what I've often been guilty of, I need to have this title or, this level in this type of organization. So let me give you a concrete example of that. Early in my career, I was doing software stuff, and I was all hell-bent on my career is going to be amazing if I learn this module of this particular software package. And I'd run around trying to get training for that module, and eventually got there, and kind of found like, hey, this is a useful skill to have, but that skill started becoming less and less relevant. A lot of what I had learned was getting offshored or being sent to lower cost companies. So, pursuing that technology-based knowledge was kind of a never-ending game, because it would eventually grow stale. The technology would either become less relevant or it would become kind of a commodity and go somewhere else. So I started looking at, were there talents I could acquire more than kind of these defined skills? And they were things like public speaking. I learned relatively early on that the people that seemed to be successful that I was around were people that were really good at conveying information and conveying that information in a way that inspired action. So that's kind of why I like this YouTube thing, because hopefully I can take some bit of information and I can present it in a way that gets you, the audience, interested, excited. Other things that I think are helpful from a talent stack perspective, look for skills that can kind of transcend technical disciplines. So a great example of that would be being a good leader. If you're a good leader, you could be a good leader in the military, sending men and women into battle. You could be a good leader on a film set. Maybe you're handling all the set pieces. You could be a good leader at a fast food joint. Maybe you make that a pleasant place to work. Maybe your team does a great job and has fun and is excited to come to work and slings burgers faster and better and with more customer satisfaction than the other fast food joint down the street. This is kind of a skill that you could put in a talent stack, and a really great talent stack you can apply to multiple disciplines. I've popped between industries a few times. I've had at least 2 or 3 moments where I've dramatically kind of reshaped and redirected the content of what I do, but that talent stack was still relevant. So things like presentation ability, I'd like to think I'm a fair to okay-ish leader, ability to manage tasks and kind of get things done from a personal and broader professional level. All these things I could kind of apply to different disciplines. So if I saw the technical area that I was working in either growing less interesting for me or kind of becoming a commodity and maybe becoming less relevant or less valuable to most companies, I was able to redirect and take that same talent stack, apply it to another discipline, learn that discipline relatively quickly, and keep myself relevant, and I think more importantly, keep myself interested in the work I was doing and keep myself motivated to get up in the morning and say, hey, I get to do X, and then 3 years later I get to do Y, but I'm still using that same talent stack. The bonus mistake I've made in my career, which I'm accused of frequently in the comments, is getting a little bit long-winded. So I apologize if this got a little long, but I hope you found a tidbit in here somewhere that you can apply to your own career and professional life. Hope you stay well. Hope you find those folks that can help guide you through your own career journey. You realize the importance of paying your dues and don't let that upset you too much along the way. And build up that talent stack. Use that to keep yourself engaged, interested, and living a life of fulfillment and peace. Big Heavy, wishing you well.